We're creating about as many jobs as those other metros combined.
So Bend hates to be compared to Boulder.
We could have a whole hour conversation about this.
I think it sets us up another kind of foundation.
Participating. I think that's the difference between being a citizen or sitting on the sidelines.
These conversations are brought to you by the Lad Group, Bend's leading real estate team. Help continue this BendBeat conversation by subscribing, sharing, and leaving us a review. So I'm here today with Eric King, City Manager, City of Bend. I'm really appreciative of your time. Thanks for coming.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And you and I have got to know each other most recently through Bend 101, and I've really appreciated your collaboration and openness through that. And I thought it would be really productive to have just kind of an informal discussion, one about kind of who you are, how you feel about the dynamics of what's happening in the city, and just kind of share your story.
Happy to do so. Thank you.
So I was doing a little bit of research on you and kind of your position in Bend. So it looks like you moved here in, what, about 2007?
Yep.
And prior to that, you were working with City of Portland, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. And before we get too much into business, who are you? Tell me a little bit about you, your family, your setup, why you're here in Bend.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess maybe one thing that defines me, I'm a middle child. I'm kind of that mediator. I sort of thrive in chaos and conflict.
Yeah.
So I kind of grew up in that realm. I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, kind of a college town, great community. Went to undergrad there, but I knew I wanted to explore a little bit more after living. Most people in the Midwest just sort of stay there.
It's a fun, comfortable place.
It is, and the people are great. And I really still, as I get older, I have more and more of an appreciation for just what the Midwest represents.
Yeah.
However, I wanted to be out west. I spent my summers up in Alaska. I was working in a national park and working in a small kind of lodge, and it just opened my world. And I said, I need to be out west. So I kind of targeted the Northwest and moved here right after undergrad. And I'm a pretty linear guy, so I'm not somebody who just shows up and hopes to get a job. I had the Oregonian started to be delivered to me in Madison to look at jobs. And I was doing an internship at the city of Madison when I was in college, really doing some statistical analysis for them. And that led me into kind of looking at local government. I was an aspiring urban planner.
Yep.
So it started off architecture, and I wanted to go bigger. I loved people. And the built environment. So planning is a great way to take those disciplines, because it's more than just a building. It's how does that interact? What's the context? I'm a context kind of person. So I kind of really got into this career through these skills of mediation, conflict resolution, planning. And I moved to Portland and started working for the city of Portland right out of undergrad, got my master's in planning. And met my wife, then started having a family. I had our son at the time and had been there for 10 years in Portland and was looking for a different experience. I think you have a different perspective, when you start having kids and what's important to them. And we have friends over here, and I applied for and got a job. Again, didn't just stumble upon Ben like a lot of people do and said, I'll move there and we'll figure it out. I don't know how to do those things. So got a job as the assistant city manager for the city of Bend, kind of building off of my municipal experience in 2007. Was only in the job for really 6 months, and the council at the time made a decision to change of direction. So I had to step in as the interim city manager, and then I had to apply for the job, and then on and on. But that's a little bit of my story of kind of how I got from like where I am professionally. I guess I also identify just as a dad with two kids that are now 15 and 17.
So you just told me before we started, you have a son who's a senior.
I have a son who's a senior at Summit High School, and my daughter is at Bend High in the IB program. So we have a foot in both schools, and live in kind of an old part of Bend, and just loving, just like a lot of folks, love my life here. I feel like we've got good friends. We have the ability to just get out and enjoy. I feel like we've got a good balance. I think I can bike to work and it takes me 5 minutes. If I need to run across town to go to a kid's sporting event, it's pretty quick and accessible. So I really I feel like yes, I have a responsibility at this city, but I also I'm a participant as well. So
very much so. And when I was Googling you last night, I was like, I was trying to get more background on you. The words that I kept on coming up were with integrity, respect, authentic, listener, et cetera. So, it plays into what you were talking about of kind of being that mediator middle kid, which I was as well. But you obviously successfully navigated that because you're, 15 years into your role. And prior to you joining or becoming city manager, I think we went through 2 or 3 positions in 8 years, something like that. There's a lot of turnover in that position, right?
There had been. I think prior to that, Ben, there was a lot of stability.
Yeah.
There was a city manager for like 17 years, Art Johnson, and then Larry Patterson for about 14 years.
Yeah.
And then after Larry, which I think was about 2000, there was 3 or 4 city managers every couple of years, a lot of turnover. And I think it was a pretty tumultuous time for
very
Bend.
dynamic time.
So,
an extreme growth curve in the early 2000s, adding tens of thousands of people into a housing bubble, the Great Recession, loss of jobs. It was a very tumultuous time.
Yeah,
and you stepped in right in the depths of that.
I think I tell people, I was all of maybe 32.
Yeah.
So I'm a doer. I'm a pragmatic Midwestern guy. So I wasn't thinking too much about all the things. It was just like, there's a problem. You got to, just plow ahead and address things. So it's interesting as I get older, probably become more reflective. I don't know if I would have gone through, I'm a little eyes wide open now.
You didn't know about it.
I didn't know about it. I was just like, well, just figure this out.
This is the way it goes.
Yeah, exactly.
Lead through the biggest crisis that Ben's dealt with in many decades. So, as we come out of the backside of that, it's been a dynamic time. You went through the Great Recession, you went through, a long, slow rebuild. And then, I think most recently, kind of some of the pandemic forces that we've all dealt with, kind of the dynamics of what happened in the city, the pandemic forces of in-migration into Bend at rates we've never seen. And then we're kind of on the backside undoing of that. So you've seen a little bit of everything. Where do we stand now? I know that's kind of a big, open, lazy question, but where do we stand as a city regarding kind of how we feel about today? Is the city of Bend optimistic? Is it conflicted? Is it challenged? What's the overriding, or all the above? But what's the sentiment over at the city?
Yeah, from a city as an organization, I think there's a lot of optimism. I think we are starting to see some stability. It's been so chaotic the last couple of years, but we've really put a lot of systems, processes, structures in place. Our infrastructure is really finally, we've got master plans and predictable growth patterns. So we have that experience of being a high growth community, and we have our long-term plans for water, sewer, roads, all solidified. When I first got here, there hadn't been large master planning efforts done for a while. So I feel very solid about, I can tell you exactly where we think growth is going to occur, how it's going to occur, how we're going to support that growth with infrastructure. And then, it's really about growing a little differently too, like really stepping into this role as a mid-sized city and reflecting a more urban landscape, more complete communities where you have right where we are right now, walkable, bikeable neighborhoods, that we're building a city for the future. I know when I go to conferences across the country for city manager conferences, I feel really fortunate to be in Bend because investment is coming into this community and I get to just help shape it in partnership with the community. So that is sort of beating in the background. I would say, however, we are starting to see some of the challenges of larger cities.
We got some big city problems.
We do, but we have the ability because of our strong network, our kind of entrepreneurial spirit here that I feel optimistic about us being able to solve them, and they're not overwhelming us. They're issues, right? I don't want to diminish the issues that we have around homelessness, around just housing affordability in general, on just the concerns around Bend's character changing. Those are real issues, and we need to pay attention to them. But I also feel like I know we can solve them, and because we've got the human capital here and people that are so committed to Bend's future that I feel super optimistic.
Well, that unabashed optimism that you have, is founded on real action. You know, it's not a naivety. It's you guys are in the teeth of some very big issues, but making progress. And from a layman of being on the outside and having the good fortune of meeting with a lot of stakeholders in that, from nonprofits that are dealing with homelessness to people that are dealing with housing affordability issues to dealing with business leaders that are trying to grow and expand and their employees can't find positions, or talking to school districts where they're having issues because of housing. You know, it's an absolutely challenging time, but I can't get through any of these podcasts without everyone talking about collaboration. And how does that collaboration tie in with the city? Because the city obviously is an entity on its own. How does the collaboration and positivity of Bend business owners and citizens and retirees tie in with what you're executing as a city? Like, you know, aren't those separate? I mean,
no, they're really integrated. I think we have our governance system as a city. When I first got here, there was a lot of conflict around clashing between environmental and business interests over growth, right? A lot of that tumultuous time in the early 2000s was that battle of growth, no growth. And it's not really an option for us. I think we've gotten past that as a community, saying, we don't have the ability to just say, no, you can't come here. You know, I know there are some folks maybe not familiar with the Oregon land use system and how it works, but we have this unique system that the state helps us, or helps design and in some ways control, but we have to plan for growth, and it's all based on population forecasts, and that's how much land we need for jobs and housing, et cetera. I think the community gets to be part of that, though, and through an ecosystem of boards, committees, commissions. So we have about a dozen or so different groups that help us, from our economic development efforts to affordable housing, to our planning commission, to our human rights and equity commission. Really, they all work in concert, and they have different lenses that they're looking at Bend through. There are about 100 folks that help the council, which is the elected body of 7 members. That group, with all those different perspectives, are really helping to shape Bend. And we really try our best to integrate those disciplines, and through good goal setting, really action plans that are coming from those groups. So people that are on those committees have a hand in helping set our course. And so we talk about collaboration and what's needed to support that. I think you have to look at the governance system and making sure that it's not just something you say, but you put it into action. And that's the best way to do it from a local government perspective, is to formalize it with these public bodies that are helping inform our work.
Yeah, I mean, from what I've seen and executed by the city, everything is very intentional, and it's very open to discourse, as messy as that discourse might be. You know, for those that are maybe have a perhaps shorter time frame on Bend, their snapshot of Bend is, 2018 to 2023 or whatever, and they say Bend's done, it's perfect, growth is causing further issues, no more. And you alluded to this in saying, hey, we don't get to make that decision. Those are Oregon state planning laws and guidelines. But how do you respond when, because we all have that sentiment. We all come to our favorite trailhead that used to be just you, and now you have to get permits to go take a hike up to South Sister, or you have 35 kids in your class, despite the fact that Bend is building a school year, right? For the last 20 years. Growth creates conflict or change. How do you respond to someone who said, time out, why is growth in the DNA of Bend?
Yeah, and I guess I understand that first. I think, and empathize a little bit, because I think we all struggle, and we all have our own ways of dealing with growth and change, and what that might kind of invoke a reaction in us. But to me, it's the part of the spirit of Bend as being a welcoming community. And I say this right now, it's Welcoming Week. We celebrate this whole week in partnership with many other community organizations to say, that's what Bend has been. I think that's that stands Bend out from other communities, particularly east of the Cascades or other rural communities that were very resource dependent. It was resources, kind of dried up. We went through the 80s, where a lot of additional regulation, supply demand issues. Anyways, a lot of towns that were based on timber or other natural resources really pulled back. And then it became, sort of fearful of outside influence. We went the other way, where we said, we want to be open. We know that people are coming here, visiting here, they're escaping to this area, and let's be open to that. And I think it's part of our spirit. So I don't want to lose that. And I think when you just reframe it about what being welcoming is, it's not meaning that I have what I want and so nobody else should get it. It's like, I want to help provide opportunity for people to look at things a little bit differently about those growth, because it's not this binary growth, no growth. That doesn't work. I think it's better to really think about how to preserve what is important. There's many ways to do that. Yes, there's some crowding and waiting lines to go play in the outdoors or go out to eat, but also there's just growing pains that come with that. And so you'll go through these cycles. I've been here almost 17 years, and it'll catch up, and then it'll be okay, and then summer comes around, and then it feels a little bit crowded. It's cyclical, right?
Absolutely.
So it's not this constant feel, and I think you might be going to a concert at the Hayden Homes Amphitheater, like, oh, okay, now I remember what I love about Ben. Like, you have these moments, right? You have these stress moments, but then you have the really good moments that make you appreciate. And it's all of those things that you can't just live a life where it's all the good stuff all the time. Like, that's just that's not how life works. So to me, you've got to take it all in. And I just keep using the word mindset, but it's like really reframing things a little bit.
Brian Ladd here. I hope you're enjoying the conversation and find this dialogue relevant to really what it means to live and work and play in this amazing community. As Ben's leading real estate team, we take our role seriously in representing both buyers and sellers at the absolute highest standards of our industry. For more information on how we can help, feel free to visit our website at benpropertysource.com or text LADD1, LADD1 to 88,000.
Talking about growing pains, I often see the world through housing. It's the industry I was born and bred in. I grew up on construction sites, and I see the world through the lens of housing. And so when I look at Bend, I think one of our major crises right now is housing. Obviously, our median price is almost $800,000 in Bend, and that's including all product types. I think if you look at single family alone, I dare say it's in the upper eights or something.
Right.
And so when we look at something like that, it's not just, hey, are people struggling to afford it? It's pushing off the bottom rungs of the housing ladder to even stability and access to housing, and housing as a human right, not just as an investment or or your home. We don't have enough roofs over people's head, and homelessness has become a glaring issue for everybody. No one can hide from the fact that it's a real issue for us now. How is the city of Bend, and I know that you're doing it with future forecasting on inventory, things like that. If someone does say Bend doesn't have their eye on the ball, housing is a big issue, what can you point to first to saying this is how we're meeting that issue?
Well, I think you said it well. We have a supply-demand issue. We are about 5,000 housing units short. So at a macro level, we need to catch up. And then let alone the growth that we're projected to have 150,000 people by the year 2040. To meet that growth demand, we need to build about 1,200 housing units per year. So we got this hole to dig out of, and then we need to keep going. We have been producing 1,800 or so housing units per year. So we are keeping up and then slowly chipping away at that 5,000 deficit. And that 5,000 in proportion to the state, it's about 140,000 units in Oregon that we're short right now. So when we stabilize supply and demand, that's when we're not going to see this huge price escalation at the highest level. So there's the market side of things, of what can the city do. And so we are changing our codes. We are making it easier for different types of housing to occur. So I would say moving more towards a form-based type of code and less of a prescriptive. I think a lot of across the country, cities are saying, all this, these colors on the map, this goes over here, this goes over. Being overly prescriptive has not really helped us. And it's in some ways created some division, and then people react to more housing, in a negative way. And so, being a little more fluid with how the regulatory landscape looks. It's also we're in the process right now of there's impact fees that you pay when you build a home. How do we incentivize smaller homes that are going to be more affordable. So
I
having
saw
a
you
tiered
change
system,
that scale a
we're
little
changing a tiered system. So
Yeah.
if you're building a smaller, there's as much as a 40% decrease in some of those upfront fees.
Yeah.
Those are the fees that get assessed for water, sewer, parks that go back to the impact on growth, right? So we do that on the upfront, but it does trickle into the cost of that housing.
Yeah.
So how do we help turn the levers a little bit to recognize that? It's also, we've created an affordable housing program at the city. We were the first in the state in 2006, where any building permit that gets pulled, 1/3% of that, whatever's being built, the value of that, is deposited into a fund, and that fund generates $1 million to a year that then we use and grant out or loan out to affordable housing developers. And we are on track to build about 1,000 deed restricted units, meaning that those units, whether they're for sale or rent, they're restricted based on a certain level of income. So it keeps that affordable, and it's typically a period of about 50 years or so.
Okay.
So we're getting more units in the pipeline to again deal with that 5,000 unit deficit. And then we're always just looking at how can we change, like legislative. There's lots of things that are happening. I think the governor is really focused on what does the legislative landscape look like, and we understand we're in a state land use system, but there's some parts of it that aren't working. So
it's been 50 years now, right?
And there's a growing up strategy in Bend, right, with our opportunity sites and really putting more housing in these walkable communities, and that's something we're really committed to doing. But we need all of it. So looking at land supply, and let's be thoughtful about land supply. We're not looking to just sprawl out into the countryside, but we are really interested in smart growth and how do we promote and the land use, to have the land use system, the statewide land use system, be more flexible to accommodate our housing needs. And we need to think differently and build coalitions. And it's not this, again, growth, no growth, environmental versus business. We need to change the channel a little bit on that. So we're doing a lot of work on the legislative front as well.
Wow. So
there's a lot out there. I mean, I would say housing is our number one issue right now as a city, and all things. And we didn't even talk about homelessness, which is, I think, as you pointed out, kind of a symptom of this bigger supply-demand imbalance. And so just as we're talking about the diversity of housing type in Bend, so we just can't be producing single-family homes. We've got to set the table for multifamily, detached, home ownership, rental, everything. We just need more of a palette. The same thing for those experiencing homelessness. Just a shelter is not going to cut it. A shelter, a congregate shelter, what most folks think of for an emergency, emergency housing. Yes, that's part of it, but so are tiny homes, so are an outdoor shelter, so is safe parking, where I might be in an RV and how do you get folks kind of moving along the continuum of housing and recognizing that we all are in as we move through life, our housing needs change, and we have to, as a city, kind of adapt to those and making sure that everybody's got a roof over their head, and it might look a little differently depending on where you're at.
Yeah, and that's been a really big eye-opener for me as I've gotten older and been in the housing industry for now 25 plus years, is to really understand that housing at the beginning tiers is a human right. And it's not to say, I do think developers and builders are often underappreciated. I think everyone classifies them as the bad guys and gals, but they're often the ones that are actually producing inventory, and they're blamed for the sprawl and whatnot. But at the entry levels, to have city engagement and understanding that there are human right issues at stake with housing, I think is really, I guess it's just a big eye opener to me, and I'm appreciative of how you guys are tackling it, because I think passivity in this is not a solution, and there's cities up and down the West Coast where it's gotten to a critical point where it's created the San Francisco, what do they call it, the doom loop, where it's homelessness and drug use and whatnot has become such a big issue that all the businesses are pulling out, and it becomes this downward spiral. And for those who have only seen the good times in Bend, we're not immune to bad times as well. So, just even, not to talk about the human rights issues or not to diminish that, But from the economic stability, I mean, it's vitally important that we solve this now.
Right. And I think expanding on not just increasing capacity for our shelter system and having more of a palette, but we also need to make sure we manage our rights of way in public spaces too.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we want our community to, both those that are experiencing homelessness and those in our business and residents, to also feel safe. And so there's this a feeling of safety and creating better opportunities and options for folks, and that comes with some regulation. And so we've recently instituted a camping code. We also are working in partnership with our region too, to say a lot of what we're seeing is folks in rural areas, China Hat and Juniper Ridge, on Forest Service land, out at Phil's Trail, et cetera.
County land, state land.
Yeah, we are surrounded by publicly owned land, which is somewhat unique here in Bend. And so how do we develop a system where we have some capacity, but at the same time there needs to be better regulations on how people are using our public lands. So it's tricky, and it requires a lot of, going back to that word, collaboration with our institutional, federal, state, and we all have different, I have a city, I feel like almost the most fortunate because I go to a city council, they create laws, right, at the local level.
Yeah.
You go to the Forest Service, and we're like, hey, can you maybe do something a little different? And you'd have to go up.
It goes all the way to DC.
Yeah, so we are all operating at different levels. So it's a challenge to have that consistency, and I think it's frustrating for folks. Like, just fix this.
Fix it. Yep.
And I wish it were that simple.
And you also have to keep the streets plowed and the water flowing.
Yeah, and I think that the challenge for the city, especially in these times, is that we tend to be just sort of the go-to, right?
Yeah.
There's an issue.
City,
you must go to the city.
Yeah.
And in reality, we're maybe just a little piece of it. And so just kind of calibrating expectations of what we can do at a local level versus what there's other levels of government and what we can and can't do. We don't provide public health services or social services. That's not something the city does. Infrastructure, public safety, and land use, basically. Those are the three things that we focus on. And in some cities, like you go back east, and there's more of a centralized local government where, like New York City, they run hospitals and schools and all the things at the local level. Here we have a separate district for parks and for schools and county, and everybody's got roles. Unfortunately, it's the lack of kind of just understanding local government and civics in general that people are just like, something's wrong, city. So, and we're having to, I get it, we're a piece of it, but not the whole thing. So,
well, I'm not sure if your middle child upbringing is enough to give you to navigate this, but you've done it awfully well. I mean, 15 years of continuity during such a dynamic time has been critically important to where we stand as Bend. So, thank you for being able to look at it and handle it with the calmness that you have for the last 15 years. I'm sure it wasn't easy. But as we stand here and look forward of obviously we have a lot of challenges on the horizon. We're dealing with it. But what's the case for optimism? What are you most excited about of where we're going right now?
I'm most excited about our built environment is changing a little bit, and I think we're seeing people coming here and Bend is, it's all things to all people, right? And that's what I love, is that you can kind of find your place here, whether you want to live, you're an empty nester and want to find a place to retire and kind of wind down, there's a place for you. Yeah. If you're a new family that is just starting and want to maybe get out of a large urban, there's a place for you. If you're just kind of experimenting and trying to not you don't know exactly where you want to be, we want Bend to be a place for you too. I think that's the track that we're on. We're trying to build out again, going back to housing, a palette of housing options to meet all those different needs. But I think everyone's real focused on that we don't want to become an exclusive community that is only here for a certain demographic. And it goes back to what we're celebrating this week, this welcoming week and being a welcoming city. Is, to me, that's it all. That's the underpinning of, I'm excited about the built environment and reflecting that, because that's what you see. But to me, what's more important is the culture that I think we've created here. And it doesn't take long. Sometimes you get a little off kilter, like, wait, okay. And so we need to, I think, as a community, as community leaders, remind ourselves what we're all about and go back to our culture, just like you do in an organization, right? If you work for a company, what are your values? What really makes you tick? It's that kind of stuff that I'm the most optimistic about, Ben.
Wow, the way you framed that our built environment and planning, foster the culture and the DNA of Bend was a very interesting synopsis of what you guys are working on. Yeah. That's really exciting. As you talk about welcoming and inclusivity, diversity has become a big focus for the city of Bend. It's become a bigger focus for a lot of people and entities and businesses and whatnot. But let's talk about kind of, in the framework of the future of Bend, how are you opening that lens to who has a voice and who gets to write the future of who we are?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a lot of work to do. I think, we've, as I said, we have this underpinning of being a welcoming city, but I would say there's a lot of folks that have moved here that don't feel that way. And that we need to work harder at that. The city's established a Human Rights and Equity Commission to put more of a focus on it. We recently went to council and we have a work plan that is really trying to do a better job of resourcing, connecting folks that have experienced discrimination or hate, how to help support those individuals. So, the experience that I have is going to be very different than a person of color or somebody that they didn't maybe choose Bend as their first option. They came here and they're like, I don't see a lot of people looking like me, and I don't feel comfortable. How do we help put support systems in place for that? And I think that we're just still figuring that out. It needs to be a coalition led. It can't just be a city. This is not just city government. It is all of the local government agencies, it's nonprofits, it's the business community all working together. So if we really truly want to create and foster a sense of belonging and inclusivity, it needs all of us, all of our partnership. The city can provide and convene, some of that, which we're trying to do. But it can't just be a city government. I think we'll fail if it's just city government.
Well, it's exciting that you're focused on that. I think the people that have lived here for 50, 60, 70 years probably could scarcely imagine what Bend is today. And what encourages me, the people that have been here for multiple generations, they're perhaps the biggest proponents of the change that we've had, and they could not have foreseen where we were going to go. And the urban environment in the Central Redevelopment District, I think, is going to be an exciting, visible, symbol of where we're going. And I'm really excited to capture the viewpoints and the energy of all the people that are making Bend home.
And it goes back to this, growing up, I had, we all have our own experience, our own lived experience, but some of the most powerful things in my life have been seeing somebody else with a completely different perspective, right? And trying to understand the world that and it made me a better, I think we all, and I think we all become a stronger community if we understand each other a little bit more. And what that means is usually slowing down. So I have found that in a fast growing community, some of this work is even more challenging because we're so distracted with things coming at us all the time. And if we're really going to build relationships and understand perspectives and create more opportunities for just a simple connection, we've got to slow down. One of the things that we did is created a block party trailer. So where we put table chairs, barbecue, cornhole games in this trailer that the city purchased, and people can check it out through their neighborhood association. So a neighborhood, we have 13 neighborhoods.
Love it.
And they can just go out into a park, and it's an instant party, and you just meet people. It goes back to this basic level. I think sometimes we overthink it's human connection. That's what we need to focus on, and just be open, right, to whether it's the politics or growing up, maybe if you grew up in poverty versus growing up with means, what does that look like? What does it mean to, have a different sexual identity or there's so many things in life that if we don't understand those perspectives and the richness that brings, we're going to miss out, right? And we're not going to produce a product. At the end, what did that product be? Whether it's housing, whether it's our economic development strategy, all these things that we're talking about, if you don't bring people along to help accomplish that work, we're going to fall into the traps that a lot of communities have seen, or societies, right, where it's all for naught, right? You have to have that foundation. So to me, it's the most important work that we can do, is to create that and preserve that culture of being a welcoming city.
Well, I don't want to speak for everybody, but this is incredibly reassuring for me, and it was kind of an authentic shot of energy that I needed, because it's easy to get frustrated by everything that's going on right now, and perhaps flipping over and going from that optimistic side of the equation to saying, I'm a little bit negative about what's going on. And I don't think anything you're saying is politically motivated. I think what where you're coming from is an authentically optimistic standpoint or viewpoint on where we're going. And Bend is a better place for having you at the reins.
No, I appreciate the opportunity, and I always seize upon if somebody wants to go a little deeper, right? It's really hard to understand what the city is doing if you're just looking at headlines in a newspaper or a 30-second spot, so thank you. I hope that folks also go deeper and actually and listen and absorb the information and challenge us too. I think that we're not trying to build a city of just cheerleaders. We're trying to build a city that is open to criticism, feedback. We don't get it right, and we are constantly calibrating and listening and trying to adjust to reflect Bend's values that are kind of changing. So I think sometimes I am envious of those cities that maybe have that little more of a maturation, right? That they've settled in a little bit more. So I can look at it from that perspective, like, oh, it'd be nice if that, but then I sort of take a step back and say, you know what, I really like going back to who I am, I really like all the change, right? And I'm wanting to sort of take all that stuff and continue to build. We're still building and molding it.